America were to release and Germany were to release their long range strike assets to amplify the damage which is being done to the Russian oil industry and infrastructure, that could be a game changer.
Well, I want to touch on the tactical, operational, strategic bit in a second. But before that, what do you think of the options for this coalition of the willing we keep hearing about on the ground in Ukraine? And do you think, or when do you think the conditions could be right for their deployment? And within that coalition of the willing, if there is a deployment, do you think there needs to be some form of peace enforcement capability, or would that be a step too far?
Well, again, people use various terms to do with this, a peacekeeping force, a resilience force. I haven't heard the term peace enforcement, but you would need a capability because that is what brings you the deterrence. Now, a traditional peacekeeping force is agreed by both sides. It's got consent. It acts in self-defense only and is there to monitor. Now, you probably don't want that in Ukraine, which is exactly why, for example, we went from this posture in NATO of reassurance, because sometimes this has been called a reassurance force, to the posture of deterrence by capability, which is why we had the enhanced forward presence of NATO with the battle groups building up to brigades in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. So that showed the intent of NATO. Now, the force could only really be inserted once there has been a ceasefire agreed. Now, again, this is one of the problems potentially if America doesn't engage in the same way in terms of negotiations. Because one of the things about negotiations for these sorts of conflicts is they take a lot longer than America tends to think. So, for example, America's only given to the end of May for their negotiations with Iran on the nuclear aspects there. They'll take longer than that, as the JCPOA did. The armistice in Korea took 2 years. It took 5 years in the Treaty of Paris to do Vietnam. So to think you're going to unlock this in short order is being mega optimistic, and that's why someone needs to be engaged. Now, really, the point I'm getting at here is direct negotiations between two sides are not necessarily that great as a determining how you will go for the future, which is why the truce, or the two truces which Russia announced, are asymmetrical, because a ceasefire leading to some sort of peace agreement needs to be symmetrical, agreed by both sides. It needs to be publicly available, the text, and formally agreed, and you need robust monitoring mechanisms. Now, we don't know what those monitoring mechanisms might be if you do insert a coalition of the willing into Ukraine, and what part of Ukraine that might be. Now, General Kellogg has talked about a resilience force. Again, we don't know what that means in military capability terms. He's talked about zones of responsibility in the same way that we probably looked at, how we carved up the West Germany and Berlin after post-45, and the Dnieper as a line of demarcation with a demilitarized zone. All those things are in the mix from Kellogg, but we've not seen those as being a part of any formal negotiations towards a ceasefire. That also illustrates in its own way the complexity of negotiations when you've probably got, in software terms, thousands of lines of code which need to be gone through by the negotiators, and we're nowhere near that at the moment.
It says it's millions of lines of code, but this is where we're getting commentary by political soundbite and unapproved terminology, just so that it adds the confusion, but makes the politicians have something that they can say that makes them sound as if they're making progress. But again, when we hear commentary on what's going on the ground, we hear people trying to describe whether the Russians are winning or the Ukrainians are winning by how much the front line has moved in the east, the tens of meters that has gone one way or the other each day. But people aren't bringing in that relationship between what's going on at the tactical level, where General Bodanov, with his special operations executive type tactics at the operational level, attacking Russia's oil infrastructure, attacking Russian logistic bases, assassinating generals, attacking other targets that would be used to help Russia continue to prosecute its tactical operations. Why do you think people are missing out on that? Is it because it's unmeasurable? Who do you think is, and it's probably the wrong way to ask, winning overall whenever you start to bring those together? What implications has that got on this strategic level negotiations?
Putin believes that he is winning slowly, and that his theory of victory, of course, is that the West will get tired of this, and that there will be pressure from Trump on the other contributors from Western Europe to desist. That will not happen, of course, because we have skin in this game. It really becomes Ukraine really becomes the containment line for Western Europe. If you believe at the grand strategic level those things about Putin trying to regain lost territory and spheres of influence, and the Russian world, Ruski Mir includes Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and those parts which are Russian speaking. It's also worth bringing to mix there, of course, that there are Russian peacekeeping forces, so called by them, in former Soviet Union countries, in Ossetia, Moldova, to absolutely prevent those countries from turning wholly towards the West. It's a pressure strategy from Russia. So Putin believes he's winning. He believes absolutely in that Gromyko doctrine. He's got, from his perspective, time on his side. He sees this as a civilizational thing. And in terms of what he sees for the future, he would want either a surrender peace from Ukraine or something akin to, on from that, a Carthaginian peace from the Second Punic War, when Ukraine ceases to exist as a sovereign country. The counterbalance to that, the mineral deal does help in that sense that they, as US has said about this free, prosperous, and sovereign Ukraine, but that is not a game changer in peace talks. There is no game changer either at the tactical or operational level yet in terms of peace talks. If America were to release, and Germany were to release, their long-range strike assets to amplify the damage which is being done to the Russian oil industry and infrastructure, that could be a game changer. But wars stop for three reasons. They stop either because of decisive military victory. That is not on the cards at the moment. Because of the improbability of military victory. Russia doesn't still see that at the moment. The chicken pecks grain by grain. He does see himself incrementally going forward, even if it's very slow. Or thirdly, because of these unacceptable costs, either from infrastructure, economic, population factors. Both sides are trying to do that. That's where the deep battle in, framework of the battlefield things come in. But there are also these clear reasons why war doesn't stop. People fearing the loss of a power base, and Putin will be out of power if he would concede large aspects. This is partly where the illegal annexation of the sort of 4+1 of Crimea and the 4 oblasts come in, because in Duma terms and political terms in Russia, they've been incorporated into Russian territory. So that would be a political loss for Putin if he were to concede any of that. But each side needs sufficient victory to justify the cost and sacrifice already made. And you can't see that in negotiations at the moment from either side. So both sides have theories of victory. Both sides' theory of victory at the moment don't look in time phasing achievable in 2025.
Okay, we may not be seeing a change in technology at the strategic level that's impacting things, but we're seeing a change in battlefield technology, and that's evolving rapidly, especially around the use of drones, electronic warfare, lasers, and the like. Should we learn the lessons from this? If so, what are they? And is there any danger of us just learning the lessons from the last war and not looking forward to the next war? And do you think, a cheeky question, that there's a future on a future battlefield for troops who are unprotected or on foot?
I think that's always a difficult one. So I think you need to go back to two other wars to see what we thought the new character of war was. The first one is the Nagorno-Karabakh War, where that war, the outcome of that war showed, and Armenia were, of course, smashed, really, showed that it was the first war where the most number of casualties and damage came from unmanned systems. The second war is the 2021 Gaza war, which actually was against not against Hamas, but was against the Palestinian Islamic Jihad by Israel, which was the first AI war, first artificial intelligence war, when Israel used the synergy between satellites and drones to, in almost real time, look at the target set that they needed to go after and smash the rocket bases of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The counter to both of those are saying that they've revealed a new character of war, is that for every, and which really comes back to JFC Fuller's theory of war from 1923, is that every improvement in war is countered by a counter improvement, and therefore that the advantage shifts between the defense and the offense. Now, it may be that the sword and shield in terms of drones versus electronic warfare for the future means that that balance is still continually shifting. And if you are better in one domain, you may negate the other domain. We may have seen, some of that in terms of the British technology for the future with counter drone technology, including sort of direct energy weapons and things like that demonstrated recently. So I think it's too early to say that everyone needs to be protected. I mean, what you can say at the moment is if you're scuttling along as a light infantry force and you're concentrated, you are going to die, and you're going to die quickly. Which is why I think what we're almost seeing at the moment is is almost a sort of no man's land, where, in terms of troops, where you can't maneuver over a no man's land because of drone reconnaissance leading to drone and artillery strike, because it really is that synergy between the drone strikes, the artillery strikes, and from the Ukrainian perspective, getting slightly more air power, which is the key determinant. Now, one, of course, of the four things which led to success in war in the 20th century was control of the air. In a way, drones are just a sort of lower level form of decentralization of control of the air, and that gives you a powerful force multiplier at the moment. But I'm sort of reluctant to say that's absolutely revealed a new character of war until the EW drone battle sort of settles down, and how that plays out for the future. But the speed of innovation and the fact that civil companies have come to the table is clearly something which is not going to change for the future. So it's not only just the democratization of airspace. I do think it's also a civil military complex war, in that you're using complex technologies from a lot of civil companies, Palantir, the intelligence framework from satellite power, space power, all those things are going to be determinants of the future. And that's where, if you were to lose that access to the American space power and intelligence power, you would caveat the ability of Ukraine, I think, to do precise targeted operations.
Well, that was aimed very much at the strategic defense review team. So hopefully they'll listen in and get the lessons from that. Finally, and very quickly, I just want to we're looking at Russia, Ukraine in isolation, but we've got growing tensions between India and Pakistan. We've got the Middle East that is continuing to fall apart. There's no indication it's coming together in any way. We've got continual Chinese expansionism, Southeast Asia, and pressure on Taiwan and elsewhere. Do you think we're on a path to global conflict?
No, I don't. I think there often are lots of headlines about we're on the brink of World War III, and for good journalistic reasons to sell, newspapers and advertising. A lot of that is out there. But most people act in a fairly responsible way, and I've seen a number of times during my career where India and Pakistan, for example, have always been on the threshold of some big conflict. They've always been talked out of it in a diplomatic framework. One of the things which could be different there is that sort of the diplomatic power of America may have dissipated a bit, but I don't think the India-Pakistan thing will lead to a all-out conflict there. I do think they'll be trading some blows, but they'll ultimately step back from the brink. And there's always been that diplomatic power applied to that conflict because of the fact that both of those are nuclear powers. The Middle East I don't think there'll be an all-out conflict there. I don't know what the day after will be in Gaza, but I think that the power of Iran has been diminished. I think it will be interesting to see what the outcome of the talks will be at the end of May. I do think there's a bit of a divergence there between Netanyahu's desire to offensively take out by military action the nuclear program of Iran, and actually a slightly more reticent America at the moment. So that divergence will be interesting. But divergence is the word, I think, which is useful because it was the divergence in the late 19th century between the sort of concert of Europe, or the balance of power in Europe, which led to conflict. And that divergence in international relations is why it is this complexity at the moment, and we don't really have this crystal ball to see what the future will hold.
Well, General Chip, I do hope that you're right on that, and we're not on a path to global conflict. As ever, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today on Frontline.
Thank you, Philip.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like to be amongst the first to get exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership at the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs, or read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.